This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 629, entitled Masculists expect women to be biconscious or be punished. Description. Masculists put powerful moral pressure on women to be FIPs and to be biconscious, since to Masculists, monoconscious feminists are seen as bigoted, contemptible, hypocritical vermin, to be severely punished by being forced to rot on the shelf. Since biconscious Masculists want nothing to do with the monoconscious feminazi bitchiness of monoconscious feminists. Masculists expect biconsciousness to be part of the culture and are pushing towards that end, haranguing monoconscious women with masculist ideas and rhetoric so that these women lose their monoconscious bitchiness that monoconscious feminism teaches them. The flyer itself. Masculists expect women to be biconscious or be punished. By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. When a biconscious masculist, in brackets, that is, someone who has had both his feminist and his masculist consciousnesses raised, that is aware that gender oppression is very much a two-way street, and that in fact women oppress men worse than vice versa, due to women's many horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes against men, close brackets, is confronted with a monoconscious feminist, open brackets, that is, a feminist who has only had her feminist consciousness raised and is therefore nearly always rather feminazi bitchy, because she has been taught by feminism that gender oppression is a one-way street, and that it is men who are the oppressors and women who are the oppressed. So of course, monoconscious feminists learn to dislike or even hate men for the ways that men oppress women, that feminism teaches them. Close bracket. Then he becomes frustrated, impatient, and motivated to harangue the monoconscious feminist with how wrong and uninformed she is about gender politics, and then attempt to browbeat her with masculist ideas, masculist rhetoric, hoping to convert her into a biconscious feminist, who then becomes, in the eyes of the biconscious masculist, a lot fairer to men, since if she becomes biconscious, she will have her anger at men for the ways that men oppress women cancelled by her female masculist anger at women for the ways that women oppress men. Biconscious masculists know that feminism teaches women nothing about how women oppress men. In today's world, July 2023, nearly all women are monoconscious. Most women in modern Western countries have been influenced by feminist ideas. Feminism has been one of the great historical ideologies of the past century, so deserves its place as one of the pillars of history that has had a long-term and profound impact on humanity, particularly on women. Masculists argue that feminism had to come first, since if men free themselves from manslavery by working and earning less, then if the wife did not have a career and was not earning money herself, then if he earned a lot less, then the family would have starved. So common sense tells us that feminism, that is, emphasizing female careerism, had to precede the rise of masculism. So now we find ourselves in an in-between historical phase in which men are now suffering the consequences of feminist changes in the law without consulting men, particularly in the divorce courts, which the feminists took over in the 70s and changed divorce law in favor of women. As a result, men are now routinely butchered in these fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts, with one father in 4 having his life destroyed. He will, in many countries, lose custody of his kids with a 90% probability. He will lose his house to his ex-wife, so she can raise her kids in it. He'll be forced to make child payments to his kids, who he will barely be allowed to see. He will lose half his wealth and stuff to her. And if she's a real fluffy, in brackets, a traditional woman who expects to parasite off the labour and money of a man, close brackets, then she may get alimony from him for life, with no moral nor legal obligation on her to get off her fat parasitic ass and FIP up. Masculists have a very powerful moral argument regarding women, which goes as follows. It was men who liberated women from household drudgery by giving women science-based medicine, so that women now have a life expectancy of 85 years. Men gave women the pill, so most women today choose to have 0, 1 or 2 kids. Men gave women household gadgets and higher education, so today in practice women have a career window of half a century, even if they stay at home for some years while the children are very small. So the Masculists are now standing up, pointing the finger at women, saying, "You women now have a life expectancy of 85 years and a career window of half a century, so you can work. We Masculists are telling you women, now that you can work, you must work. Since anything else is man's slavery, living off the labour and money of a man, which is something that is hated by Masculists, who see fluffydom as manslavery and manslavery as slavery, and hence hated and a war issue." End quote. Masculists are abolitionists who see man's slavery as literally 1,000 times bigger problem than was Negro slavery, given the numbers. Masculists put powerful moral pressure on women to FIP up, to grow up, to take responsibility for their own lives and not expect fluffy style to be able to parasite off the money and labour of a man. Masculists see the gender crimes that women commit against men as horrible and decades lasting, and hence a moral abomination, something to be truly hated by men, the worst being women's, that is fluffies, man's slavery, as a war issue, and scream at monoconscious feminists who have no clue as to the level of moral horror that Masculists show towards the man's slavery of fluffies, manslaving men for decades of their lives, working for women who don't bother to get career competent educations and expect to leech off the labour and money of a man. Masculists have such a hatred of manslaving, divorce-raping fluffies and fluffy feminists that they are motivated to kill them, seeing them as the enemy to be wiped out. Masculists have the same level of disgust and hatred towards man's slavery as the abolitionists in the northern states of the US in the 1800s had against the slavers of Negroes in the southern states of the US. The deep disagreement over the morality of Negro slavery was the root cause of the US Civil War that eventually resulted in the deaths of over 500,000 US soldiers. Masculists have a hatred of manslaving fluffies and fluffy feminists and aim to kill them as their enemies. They don't need to put these women up against a wall and shoot them. Masculists merely choose to ignore them, causing these women a much crueler death, dying slowly, rotting on the shelf, manless, and hence loveless, sexless, babyless, utterly rejected both socially and sexually, and spat at. Most monoconscious feminists have no idea of the level of hatred coming from men as a result of the 1 in 4 fathers being butchered in the hated fluffy feminist controlled divorce court system, which is having deep repercussions. For example, young men see the butchery of their fathers, uncles, older male friends in the fluffy feminist controlled divorce courts and decide to wipe their hands of marriage and paternity, since they absolutely refuse to accept the 1 in 4 chance of being butchered. So they are wiping out whole populations. But in reality, they are reacting to the toxicity of divorce created by the hated fluffy feminists who control the divorce courts, who see men merely as cash machines who exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies. These fluffy feminists, being women, more short-sighted than men, and hence do not see the longer-term consequences of their actions. That is, the rise of the MGTOW, MGTOW, men going their own way movement, who are so disgusted with the toxicity of the divorce courts for men that they see marriage and paternity as toxic, so reject marriage and paternity, spending their money on themselves, and in many cases are so pissed off with a monoconscious attitude of feministed women that these MGTOWs consider these women undateable, so live the lifestyle of the MGTOW monk, having nothing to do with women, not even pumping and dumping them. Masculists have no patience nor tolerance for monoconscious feminists who seem profoundly hypocritical and bigoted to biconscious masculists, who are very well informed how women oppress men, and worse than vice versa. So typically, when a biconscious masculist is verbally confronted with a monoconscious feminist, he harangues her, telling her about the major gender crimes that women commit against men, in particular the big three that the masculists talk about, namely women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, women's forced fathering, etc. Masculists now expect women to be biconscious, that is, to be informed as to how women oppress men, because if she isn't, then she will be much more likely to be a monoconscious feminist who is a pain in the ass to a biconscious masculist, and hence a woman to be punished for her monoconscious feminazi bitchiness. Masculists see monoconscious feminists as contemptible hypocrites who are critical of men for the ways that men oppress women, that feminism teaches women, for example, rape, sexual harassment, domestic violence, etc., but who remain ignorant of how women oppress men, and far worse. So biconscious masculists express their great impatience and intolerance towards monoconscious feminists with strong feelings and contempt, and send these monoconscious feminists away with a real flea in their ears, telling these feminists that they are repulsive to biconscious masculists who will never have relationships with them, not even pump and dump them, utterly rejecting them as human beings, as immoral, parasitic vermin, the enemy of the masculists, and punished severely by being forced to rot on the shelf. Masculists are saying to these monoconscious feminists and to fluffy women, quote, "What are you going to do in a few years when nearly every man you come across has been infected with the masculist virus? Who expects women to be biconscious, to be a responsible adult, a FIP, who does not expect to parasite off a man for decades, thus manslaving him for decades, a highly criminal and hated act as seen by the biconscious masculists?" Question mark. End quote. Masculists expect women to be biconscious. They see biconsciousness as something that everyone should know about because it is so fundamental to the quality of life of men. The core idea of masculism is that it is a rebellion by men against being man's slaves to women, working for women for decades of their lives. Masculists have a hatred of man's slavery and kill their enemies, the fluffies and fluffy feminists, who desire to be fluffies and live off the money and labour of a man for decades. As the number of biconscious masculists increases into the many millions, nearly every woman will feel the powerful moral pressure on her to fib up or risk being spat at by an increasingly masculisted culture. Young upper middle class women will pour into STEM and the professions at high school and college in order to meet the demands of biconscious masculists who are everywhere, spitting on fluffies and aiming to wipe them off the face of the earth. To masculists, fluffydom is a war issue, something to be hated and exterminated, and in a decade probably most women will know this and will be forced to react appropriately, or will not get a man and be viciously, cruelly rejected from society for not being a FIP, for being a hated, detested, to be destroyed, bloody fluffy. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man's Slaves to Women. an e-textbook of 620 plus Masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. These flyers are available in text and video formats on Minds, BitChute, Odyssey and MGTOW.tv. Ciao.